שלום לכולם, אתם באולפן טוב, אני גלי בת חורין, והפעם יש לנו רעיון מאוד מאוד מעניין, ואני מתנצלת מראש, הוא יהיה באנגלית. נמצא איתנו כאן הכתב או העיתונאי העצמאי, קומנטייטר באנגלית, ג'ונתן סצ'ודי. I told you I'll mispronounce it.
זה בסדר, זה Sacerdoti.
Sacerdoti, okay.
לא חשוב.
At the moment he's in England, and I was calling Jonathan because a special event has occurred a few weeks ago in the Oxford Union. This is a place in the Oxford University where they supposed to be exercising free speech, and they hosted a lot of very interesting and important debate, but this time, they were debating between two groups. One group was pro-Palestine, which is it's actually anti-Israel or anti-Semite. And after that, our group came with a very, very hostile crowd. And what was very special about this event was that when Jonathan came on to speak in behalf of Israel, he was booed. He was booed at the beginning, and people were shouting curses at him. It was supposed to be Oxford, you know, it's the poshest place in the earth, maybe, shouting curses and disturbing him. But halfway through and up to the end, the crowd, the same crowd, actually cheered him. So, Jonathan, how did that miracle, how did you manage to get to do this miracle?
Well, firstly, thanks for having me on to talk about this. I've been astounded at how much interest there's been around the world, not just in Israel and not just in the UK, at what happened at the Oxford Union. And I think it's because of the dreadful treatment that we received there, the utter abuse, and it became obvious that this was planned. They never intended to hold an open or honest or fair debate on Israel. I mean, down to the invitation itself, which was peculiar, lacking in details. They tried to stitch up our team so that it wouldn't be very good. In the end, we pulled together a stellar team, and we went there to debate the motion.
So let's hang on over that for a second. First of all, you actually had your team was escorted with security, right? Because there was threat to your well-being or maybe your life, right?
So it was deemed important that we should have some security for being there. Campuses can be dangerous places these days when you talk about Israel. And our security advice was that we should go there with people, yes. So we did have to have bodyguards effectively with us, and we had to plan our way in and out in case there was any trouble. So that was unfortunate, and I think also definitely noteworthy. Yes, you're right.
And before that, there was some changes in the members of the team. Do you want to elaborate that, including the funny bit about the one who escaped? I'd like to hear that.
Yes, of course. So the union is run by students every term. They have elections and they vote in a new president. It's a sort of kindergarten for parliament. A lot of our prime ministers over the years have held positions as students in the Oxford Union. So the president they had that term, was an Egyptian Arab called Ibrahim Osman Mawafi. And he had invited for this debate 4 people on each side, for and against Israel. And on the team against Israel, he'd invited Norman Finkelstein and Miko Peled among the 4.
Norman Finkelstein is a Jewish scholar, very anti-Israel, very outspoken.
Yes.
He's a professor, isn't he?
I think you're being very charitable in calling him a scholar. But yes, he is an anti-Israel academic, supposedly. His contribution is well known. It's infamous for being virulently and passionately anti-Israel. He's something of a bully in how he does interviews. Regardless, they invited him. And Miko Peled is another Jewish anti-Israel activist. Both of them were invited. Our side had 4 bookings. Now, 1 or 2 people pulled out over the course of the preparations, and we recommended some replacements. So the replacements we recommended were Yosef Haddad and Mossab Hassan Youssef, both of them very well-known figures. Yosef Haddad, an Israeli Arab, and Mossab, in fact, born to the son of a Hamas founder and senior leader, who then changed sides and informed on Hamas to Israel, helping save countless lives by foiling suicide bombings, acting as a sort of double agent. And he's been really outspoken over the last year in Israel's defense in the media. So actually, in recommending those 2 people, we weren't just pulling a stunt by suggesting 2 Arabs on our side to meet the 2 anti-Israel Jews on theirs. We were helping by choosing 2 of the finest people who could not only disprove their allegations of apartheid and genocide with their arguments, but also actually with their very existence. Yosef Haddad,
Yosef Haddad emphasized there, you sitting here in England and you telling me, an Arab Israeli, that I'm living in an apartheid state, I'm a living proof that I'm doing that and I'm coming here over to speak. I'm not coming from an apartheid state. So he was brilliant, and he was one of the only guys on the behalf of Israel that actually cursed back in Arabic when the Arabs cursed him. That made me laugh.
It was interesting because when we went into that room, I knew we weren't going to win their vote, and I knew we weren't likely to be popular. But what I didn't really know was that they'd filled the room with people who were going to be abusive and disruptive of the event. So it's not free speech when you invite people you disagree with, but then try to stop them speaking or try to intimidate them. And the way they did that, as you pointed out, there was a lot of Arabic being shouted at us, among other insults. There was plenty in English too, not to worry. I got the gist of what they thought of me in English. But with all this Arabic cursing, actually Mossab and Yosef, I think, understood a lot more of the severity than we did. So yes, there was some back and forth that way. But if you're going to debate the Middle East, I guess you can expect to have Middle Easterners in the room.
Yes, but another thing, you told me that once you brought Mashab to the debate, something very strange happened to the other team.
Yes, so when we did suggest Mossab, they tried not to invite him, by the way. They told us they had, but then they didn't. Through a lot of back and forth, we did manage to confirm him as a speaker on our side. And at that point, Norman Finkelstein pulled out. So I think Norman Finkelstein was afraid of being in a debate against our team, against the people there. I don't know what his given reason has been, but the union then invited him to speak the following day, not in a debate, just a speech, unopposed. So I think it really showed that what he was afraid of.
This is disgusting. Yeah. That you have a free speech debate. It's like supposed to be fair. British people, I think, invented fairness and the fair game. And in Oxford, which is so distinguished institute, they rig the fairness in the debate, and eventually they bring the worst adversary to speak freely without anybody there arguing or debunking him. This is really, it's so sad and it's so disgusting. It's sad what happened. But okay, let's go back now to your speech. That it seems like after, by the way, at least million viewers on the internet, you somehow manage to turn a real hostile audience that didn't really come to hear, and a lot of them came just to disturb. You managed to get a big applause. How did you do that? How did you take them that journey?
So I don't think I convinced them very much on Israel, but the applause that I did get from them was after the particularly vicious piece of abuse about 8 minutes in, which lasted for a couple of minutes. So there was a woman who decided to stand up and screech at me at the top of her lungs that I was a liar, and then some rather less nice words that I won't repeat here. But it went on and on and on, and eventually we appealed to the president to have her taken out, just because it wasn't possible to have a debate or even to continue speaking with that going on. So given that's the case, I mean, I would have been very happy if she'd had a sort of intelligent point to make or interjection to deal with it.
It's not. It's never is the fact. It's never is the case, right? It's never.
That's the format. That's the point in debate. But of course, it wasn't. The point was, I mean, there was another one shortly after who screamed something at me, and I said, you know, if you have a point to make, I'd love to hear it. Let's talk about it. But of course, at that moment, she didn't. So what happened though was that after that main disruption, in which I was very severely verbally abused, I did address that point. I said to the room that, you know, I had come there along with the other three speakers on my side to put to them a case that maybe they didn't agree with. I said, I know that many of you don't agree with us. I know that many of you maybe even don't like us. Maybe you hate us. But the whole point in the format of debating is that you should go there with an open mind, or at least an open enough mind to hear the arguments on both sides. That's the very principle. And then you can decide. At
least if you hate us, have the information to know why you're hating us for, if ever.
Absolutely. And I mean, you're welcome to sit through a debate and keep the same view. Lots of people do. I think it's often human nature. But I think it's just a bare minimum of respect for the format, not just the guests, to let them speak and to let them express an argument. And I did. You know, I wasn't there to hurl insults. I wasn't there to be abusive. I wasn't there even for sort of poetry slam style anecdotes, which the other side mostly stuck to. I was there to engage with the question that we'd been asked, whether Israel could be described as apartheid or genocidal. And I, you know, gave a speech on those points, which is to say, I don't think it can be under international law. Under the requirements of both of those conventions, you require a certain level of intention and provable points that show there's an intention, a plan, that it's carried out. I just don't think Israel qualifies on those, whether you like or not the conduct of the IDF in Gaza over the last 14 months. It's actually not the question. But of course, it touched on all that. But anyway, I think the applause came for me only really at that moment where I called out this kind of abuse and screeching as not really appropriate for the place. I think I won them over maybe on that, some of them, but it didn't stop. It didn't end it. I mean, that was not the purpose of the event from the union's perspective. Their purpose was to just, you know, throw some Jews in a room and give them a good kicking. And I think on that level, they succeeded, but they didn't make us crumble. We went there, we made our case. And as you said, many people have watched our speeches across the world, and the feedback I've received, which is a large quantity, has been almost exclusively positive and disappointed in their treatment of us. So whether or not you agreed with our points, I think people were disgusted with how we were treated.
I must say, I watched it, and I myself, I consider myself quite a tough girl, okay, with not saying the... I was watching this, and I was fearing angry and distressed, and I put myself in your shoes. I couldn't keep a calm face. I couldn't keep on talking. I might start crying, or maybe jump on the crowd to try to bite someone's neck or something like that. They made me as a watcher so furious, and I lost it. And you didn't. You kept so calm. But I've got to say other things. Another thing that maybe it's not the right thing, the right politically correct thing to say, but I've got to say it now, because if I could have, if I'd been there, I would say, if maybe Israel is making a genocide, but it's effing not good enough genocide, and I've got the proof for it, because if it was enough unpleasant for the Palestinians, for Gaza, for the Hamas, the first thing they would do is giving back the hostages. So as long as they're holding the hostages, they don't need the hostages. Hostages are not food. They don't need to eat them. It's not land. If they give up land. It's not surrender. Just give up what you take. So as long as you keep our hostages, people that you stole from Israel, don't accept us not to do anything possible, including genocide, unless you say we had enough. At least take back the people that we stole from bed. Is that it? I know it's not politically correct. It makes me angry. That's what I would have said there, instead of trying to convince them that 40,000 people is not enough, or it's the numbers are not right. 40,000 people dead, even though it's all children, is not enough. If the Hamas didn't say that's enough, we're returning the people that we stole.
Well, I mean, that wasn't my argument, I hasten to add. I would say that, I don't consider what Israel is doing in Gaza to be a genocide by the simple and plain definitions given in the Genocide Convention. It's very specific, and I drew on historic genocides to make that point, specifically the Holocaust. I'm the son of a Holocaust survivor, and also the genocide in Rwanda. So when you think about the way that those genocides, just as two examples, were carried out, what's going on in Gaza doesn't compare, doesn't come close. I said in the speech, the Nazis had the Wannsee conference in which they planned their final solution to the so-called Jewish question. And it is clear that that was planning of a genocide. It's clear when you look at what they did, documented, that it was a systematic genocide being carried out in whole or in part, as the law says, to try and eliminate a people. None of that is happening in Gaza. There is no documented evidence of such a thing. In fact, what there is documented evidence of, and it's made its way even into the New York Times, hardly a pro-Israel publication, 10 meetings held by Hamas with their Iranian backers and with Hezbollah for what they called the big, I can't remember what it is now, the big operation.
The final solution.
Which well, basically, and they give their very detailed plans of how they are planning to carry out what was effectively a genocide or an attempted genocide on October the 7th. There is a big difference. Israel, in its behavior, in its actions, in its military action, isn't doing what you said, I think. It isn't seeking ruthless and horrible revenge on the Palestinian people. When traveling around Israel just over the last few days as well, speaking with military sources, political sources, analysts, and everyone down from the top to general people on the street, I appreciate that while there is anger over what happened on October the 7th, and you could understand if people feel a sense of revenge, this is not how Israel's war is being carried out. Israel is very rigorous in its attempts to obey.
But by the way, let's speak for a second about revenge. Some people say revenge is a sign of a will to genocide or something like that. But all the justification of every action of the Hamas that shouldn't be justified is justified by their fair right to revenge. So decide if revenge is something that can justify deeds. So what do you want from us? You can't have two-tier judgments?
Yes, what you're pointing to is a sort of double standard. And I think that Israel is often the victim of double standards in arguments. So, for example, if you believe that raping, murdering, setting on fire and kidnapping civilians is justified by Palestinians who burst over the border into Israel on October the 7th, it is strange that you would not feel it justified that Israel is carrying out a war against Hamas, who organized and perpetrated those atrocities, though not alone. They did it with plenty of Gazan civilians as well. And in that war, Israel is making every effort to spare the lives of uninvolved people, to have them evacuated before they strike, to call off strikes when there's evidence that those who shouldn't be targeted might be, to help get through the human shield, the use of civilian infrastructure that Hamas puts in place in order to maximize the civilian casualties. I mean, Hamas basically is carrying out human sacrifice of its own people. If it claims to care for or look after the Palestinian people and the Palestinian cause, it has a strange way of showing it, because it deliberately draws Israeli fire towards the places where those people are, whether it's in their homes, their mosques, their schools, their universities, or their hospitals. Israel then has a really complicated job to try and obey international law, to try to debilitate Hamas, which is the stated war aim, but to do so without breaking international law, without targeting civilians, though civilians do die. And I think that on the whole, as far as I'm aware from the evidence I have seen, Israel is doing an extremely good job of that, but that doesn't mean that civilians haven't died. It doesn't mean there's isn't a lot of suffering in Gaza. There is, but I don't think that it's motivated by revenge, and I don't think that it's a genocide, and I don't think that Israel is trying to break international law in its actions. I think the contrary. I think the genocide that is relevant is what happened on October the 7th. If people have forgotten it already, shame on them. They need to go back and remind themselves, and it's not difficult to do so because Hamas published and streamed videos. I can send them to anyone now in moments. They can find them on Telegram. They can find them on websites. They're gruesome and horrific. And in those videos, you hear the fighters themselves, the terrorists themselves, explaining their actions. If 1,000 of us die, if 2,000 of us die, it is for jihad. They weren't talking about peaceful settlement with Israelis. They weren't talking about coexistence, living side by side in two states for two peoples. They were talking about jihad, and that's what they were carrying out. That was a genocidal act. These are people who, when they had control of a territory in Gaza, not a single Jew could live in it. That is an apartheid. So these allegations of apartheid and genocide leveled at Israel by the Oxford Union or anyone else completely overlook the fact that the true perpetrators of those crimes are the people alleging Israel is carrying them out.
And another, to add another claim to that, there's a two way to think about innocent civilians. On one hand, if there are innocent civilians, even though they all voted in democratic election, they voted for Hamas. If you consider the uninvolved citizen that they are being sacrificed, obviously, by the terrible organization Hamas, everybody should be thanking Israel for trying to demolish Hamas and set them free. On the other hand, if that's not the case, Israel is fighting everybody who belongs to the Hamas. So the way I look at it, nobody can blame us for going after Hamas, and also for even the collateral damage by citizens. There is a supporter of Hamas that are not innocent, or people who are dying, unfortunately, in the quest to demolish Hamas one and for all and free Palestine from Hamas.
Well, my understanding from speaking with legal advisors in Israel to the army and to the government in the past is that, in fact, Israel doesn't use the most maximalist version of interpretation of international law on who is a legitimate target. So actually, what I think you might be saying is that those who willingly put themselves in front of terrorist fighters as a sort of civilian human shield, some interpretations of international law include them as legitimate targets. And actually, my understanding is that the Israeli doctrine is not to include those people when a case could be made to include them. So actually, it's not pushing things to the limit, even in that respect. I would say that the narrative that's been put on this by some, that Israel is targeting civilians, is one that plays on a prejudice that people have thanks to years of slurs and calumnies about Israel, which is that the Jewish state, Israel, enjoys somehow killing civilians or children, that it is engaged in this as some sort of sport. And there is, I believe, no evidence of that. That's not to say there isn't evidence of civilians dying or being harmed by the wars that Israel is forced to engage in because of its terrorist neighbors. But it does say that they're not being targeted specifically. Sometimes
it seems like the terrorist enemy, the Hamas, is inflicting on Israel their motivation, because their motivation is killing Jews no matter what, for fun, for their religious. Their motivation is genocidal. And I'm sorry to say there won't be apartheid if Israel would be controlled by people like Hamas. There wouldn't be apartheid. It will be genocide. Nobody will be left to be apartheid. And maybe the last thing I want to add to this conversation, that the Israeli army has proved that if he wanted to, had he is strong enough, had he wanted to genocide the people in Gaza, within few days there wouldn't be one person living in Gaza. So we're doing a very, 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 very bad job of genociding with all the power we have, and including the fact that we're using very, very high profile and very expensive bombs just to avoid hurting people that are not involved. So it could have been, we could have flattened Gaza within days and it would have been cheaper for us, and not one soldier would have died. So we sacrificed our soldiers just to spare the life of the so-called innocent people in Gaza, and we're still getting blamed.
Now, I think that Israel had two challenges in its engagement in Gaza this time. One is, as you say, that it didn't intend to inflict illegitimate or disproportionate civilian deaths or harm. And the other one is, of course, that they took people hostage. So it means that Israel had to act very carefully to try not to risk the lives of hostages, which sadly, you know, even then there have been deaths that have been attributed to Israeli military action, and that is tragic as well. I would say that Israel has always, as far as I can see, historically, acted responsibly within war to try to engage in to try to pursue its aims of war without unnecessary or unavoidable damage to civilian populations. It's just how it is. Israel is surrounded by enemies which choose to use civilian populations as a defense for their war, as a defense for their fighters, their weapons. And to some extent, what I'm going to say now is it's from their own words. They do it deliberately. If they have to sacrifice countless deaths, it's really part of their method. And it's a method which is inspired by Islamic war doctrine. And they've said it themselves. Hamas have said it since October the 7th, that even if more lives need to be sacrificed, they said it before October the 7th and after, senior Hamas figures, they're all right with that because they feel that this is part of the method of war. And this is a strategy that we see across extremist Islamic movements, Muslim Brotherhood, Hamas, which is a chapter of the Muslim Brotherhood, other Shia militias, as well as those non-Shia sponsored by Iran in the region. The value of life to the terrorists who deliberately put civilians in their way as a method of defense is clearly not the same as our Western value. And Israel still conducts itself according to those more Western values of trying to spare those lives where it can, both because that's the requirement of international law and because it is a moral army, a moral country. Let's not forget that the ethics and morals of most of the Western world are deeply linked to and based on Jewish values, so-called Judeo-Christian values. These values come from the religion of Judaism, which is the central feature of Israel, the Jewish state. So it's no surprise that these should be part of it. And I think that we need to just remember that this is quite largely a religiously motivated war in which certain bad actors are willing to sacrifice people in order for a bigger aim. I think that's something that's missing from a lot of the discussion and debate and analysis in the West, but I think it's very important that people are reminded of that as often as possible.
Jonathan, in that important notion, I will have to leave you now. Thank you very much for this conversation. I hope it's not it's the first one, but I hope it's not the last. I urge you all to look for the Oxford Union conversation about with Jonathan
Sacerdoti.
And you have Yosef Haddad there and Natasha
Hausdorff as well, who is an expert on international law, so she can answer many of those points as well, which she does regularly.
So you go there, you go there, look in YouTube, look for it, and keep on listening to us. Great interviews with interesting people. Thank you very much, Jonathan. תודה לכולכם שהייתם איתנו. תודה רבה.
שלום לכולם, מזמין אתכם להצטרף לכנס הגדול של ערוץ טוב עם מיטב המומחים. כמובן, מעביר הרצאה בנושא איראן מימי הביניים עד עצם היום הזה, דת, פוליטיקה, אזור גיאופוליטי, איך איראן מאז ועד היום התגלגלה למצב הנוכחי. לפרטים הנוספים והצטרפות, תיכנסו ללינק בנגן.